From the moment we are born, before we understand language, before we form memory, before we even know what sex is, we are already learning about it. Not through explicit lessons, not through formal conversations, but through tone, through silence, through what is celebrated, through what is avoided, through what is punished, through what is never named. Family upbringing is the first classroom we ever sit in. And sex, whether spoken about or not, is always on the syllabus. Some of us grew up in homes where love was open, where affection was visible, where questions were welcomed, where bodies were not a source of shame. Others grew up in homes where sex was a forbidden word, where curiosity was treated like rebellion, where desire was something to suppress, deny, or fear. And many of us grew up somewhere in between, receiving mixed messages that followed us quietly into adulthood. What's important to understand is this: your attitudes about sex did not come from nowhere. They were shaped, they were learned, they were absorbed, and once you see that, you can begin to understand yourself with compassion instead of judgment. As children, we don't just listen to what our families say. We watch what they do. We notice how parents talk to each other. We notice how they touch, or don't. We notice how they react to scenes on television. We notice jokes that make them uncomfortable. We notice when the room goes quiet. We notice when anger shows up. We notice when tenderness disappears. We are pattern seekers long before we are thinkers. So if affection was rare, we may learn that intimacy is awkward or unsafe. If conflict was explosive, we may associate sex with tension or control. If love was conditional, we may learn that sex is something you trade for approval. If silence ruled the home, we may learn that our questions are dangerous. And none of this happens consciously. A child does not sit down and decide what to believe about sex. A child adapts. Adaptation is survival. In families where sex is never discussed, silence becomes the teacher. The absence of conversation sends its own message. It tells the child that sex is something to hide. That curiosity is something to suppress. That desire is something to manage alone. And when children grow up managing their curiosity alone, they often turn to secrecy instead of communication. They may learn about sex from peers who are just as confused. From media that exaggerates and distorts. From images that prioritize performance over connection. From narratives that confuse power with intimacy. And because the family never provided a grounding framework, these external influences can feel overwhelming, confusing, or even harmful. On the other hand, families that talk openly about sex don't just transfer information. They transfer values. They show that bodies are not shameful. That boundaries matter. That consent is essential. That desire is human. That intimacy is not just physical, but emotional and relational. But openness alone is not enough. The tone matters. A conversation filled with fear can be just as damaging as silence. A conversation filled with control can teach compliance instead of understanding. A conversation filled with moral superiority can create rebellion instead of reflection. Children are not just listening for facts. They are listening for safety. They are asking, even if silently, "Can I talk to you without being punished? Can I ask without being shamed? Can I be honest without losing love?" If the answer feels like no, then sex becomes disconnected from trust. And when sex is disconnected from trust, it often becomes disconnected from self-respect. Family upbringing also shapes how we understand gender roles within sexuality. In some homes, boys are subtly encouraged to pursue, to conquer, to prove something through sexual experience. Girls may be encouraged to restrain, to protect, to preserve value by saying no. These messages don't always come through direct instruction. They come through praise. They come through warnings. They come through double standards. A son who is teased for not being interested in sex may learn that masculinity is measured by desire. A daughter who is policed for showing interest may learn that femininity is measured by restraint. And later in life, these early lessons can turn into pressure, confusion, or resentment. Some people feel compelled to perform sexuality in ways that don't align with who they are, simply to meet an inherited expectation. Others feel guilt for wanting what they were never allowed to want. Family upbringing doesn't just influence whether we feel comfortable with sex. It influences how we feel about ourselves while having it. It shapes whether we associate sex with connection or anxiety, with love or obligation, with freedom or fear. It shapes whether we feel present in our bodies or disconnected from them. And for many people, these patterns remain invisible until something breaks. Until intimacy feels empty. Until desire disappears. Until relationships repeat the same painful cycle. Until shame shows up where pleasure should be. Until closeness triggers fear instead of comfort. That's often when people start asking deeper questions. Why do I feel this way? Why is this so hard for me? Why do I react like this? And the answers often lead back to childhood. Not because parents intended harm. Not because families were malicious. But because every family is carrying its own history. Your parents learned about sex from their parents, who learned it from theirs. And so on. Silence, shame, fear, control, confusion. These things travel through generations unless someone stops and examines them. And that examination takes courage. Because questioning your upbringing can feel like betrayal. It can feel ungrateful. It can feel disloyal. But understanding is not the same as blaming. You can acknowledge the limitations of your upbringing while still honoring the love that existed within it. You can recognize the impact without assigning villainy. And when you do, something powerful happens. You realize that your current attitudes about sex are not fixed truths. They are inherited frameworks. And frameworks can be rebuilt. For people who grew up in strict or morally rigid homes, sex may be associated with guilt even in committed, loving relationships. Pleasure might trigger anxiety. Desire might feel dangerous. Even happiness might feel undeserved. For people who grew up in chaotic or boundaryless homes, sex may feel disconnected from safety. Intimacy may feel overwhelming. Closeness may trigger fear of loss or engulfment. For people who grew up with inconsistent messages, sex may feel confusing. They may swing between craving connection and pushing it away. Between openness and withdrawal. None of these responses mean something is wrong with you. They mean something happened to you. And the moment you understand that, self-compassion becomes possible. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" And you start asking, "What did I learn?" That shift changes everything. Because what is learned can be unlearned. But unlearning does not mean erasing your past. It means integrating it. It means becoming aware of the emotional reflexes that show up around sex. It means noticing when shame speaks in your voice. It means recognizing when fear is borrowed, not chosen. It means slowing down enough to ask yourself, is this belief truly mine? Or is it something I absorbed without consent? Family upbringing also influences how we talk about sex with others. Some people struggle to articulate needs. Some avoid conversations entirely. Some use humor to deflect. Some intellectualize to avoid vulnerability. These communication patterns are not random. They are echoes. Echoes of conversations that never happened. Echoes of reactions that taught caution. Echoes of moments where honesty felt unsafe. And until we recognize these echoes, they continue to shape our relationships. True sexual health is not just about biology or technique. It's about emotional safety. It's about communication. It's about alignment between desire and values. And those things are deeply rooted in early relational experiences. This is why healing around sexuality often involves revisiting childhood, not to relive pain, but to understand context. To see the child who was doing their best to make sense of the world. To offer that child the understanding they didn't receive. To update old beliefs with new awareness. You are not obligated to remain loyal to ideas that limit your ability to connect, to feel, or to live fully. You are allowed to evolve. You are allowed to redefine what sex means to you. What intimacy looks like to you. What boundaries protect you. What pleasure honors you. And that process does not require perfection. It requires honesty. Honesty with yourself about where you came from. Honesty about what still affects you. Honesty about what you want to change. For some people, this journey includes therapy. For others, it includes education. For others, it includes conversations they never thought they'd have. For many, it includes grief for what they didn't receive. Grief is not weakness. It is acknowledgement. And acknowledgement creates space. Space for growth. Space for choice. Space for healing. The goal is not to blame your family. The goal is to free yourself from unconscious patterns. Because when you bring awareness to the influence of upbringing, you gain agency. You stop reacting and start choosing. You choose how you want to show up in intimacy. You choose how you want to communicate. You choose what values you want to carry forward. And if you are a parent, or plan to be one, this awareness becomes even more powerful. Because you begin to realize that your silence teaches. Your tone teaches. Your reactions teach. Not perfectly, but profoundly. And that realization invites intention. It invites gentleness. It invites humility. It invites growth. No family gets everything right. But every generation has the opportunity to be more conscious than the last. To speak where there was silence. To soften where there was fear. To listen where there was judgment. And even if you never change your family of origin, you can change the family of self you carry inside you. You can become the adult who speaks kindly to your curiosity. Who respects your boundaries. Who allows desire without shame. Who understands that sex is not a measure of worth, but a form of connection. Family upbringing shapes us, but it does not define our destiny. It writes the first draft, not the final chapter. And the moment you realize that, you reclaim authorship of your own story. A story where sex is not a source of fear or confusion, but a reflection of self-awareness, respect, and authenticity. A story where you are no longer living by inherited scripts, but by chosen values. And that is not just healing. That is liberation.